Saturday afternoon, I sat in the back of the bar, enjoying the silence. This place had become a favorite of mine a few years ago when I was out walking alone. I discovered it shortly after I came here after leaving Paradise, the place I called home. At the time, I bought a local gas station and garage for cheaper than they were worth. They had been for sale for 2 years. The owner was desperate to sell them. I saw the potential in them and made a lowball offer as I thought it was the perfect place to start my life over. It helped me leave behind what I was forced to leave behind. The first thing I did was build a large retail store at the front of the lot, across from the gas station, to supply the town after the only grocery store closed for the evening at 7 o'clock and changed pumps to pay at the cash register. To do this, the tanks had to be moved. Now the pumps were visible from the store, and there were plenty of customer spaces left in the middle of our large parking lot. From 7 p.m. to midnight was the busiest time in the store. The gas bar shop was now open 24/7. The garage, which was in the back of the parking lot, was open 8 to 5, 5 days a week. On Saturdays, I would come in and work on special projects. The bar was upset for a while when the retail part started selling basic liquor. Like most similar establishments in small towns, it wasn't possible to get rich quick, but the bar generated a very good income and helped create needed jobs in the community. Each year, we were able to save money better than many others. With no real jobs outside of farming, most young people left as soon as they could. After a little restructuring of the store's internal merchandising, thanks to a woman I had to hire, it turned into a very successful business. In a short time, it made back the money I had put into it as an equity loan. We had to double our staff, it was so crowded. On Friday and Saturday nights, we sold a lot of junk food as those leaving the bar were trying to sober up a bit before going home. On Sundays, we sold lots of cold beer at reasonable prices. I was just sipping a double shot of Jack Daniels with a glass of ice water and a cut lemon, having just finished replacing the steering column in an old-age truck. It was a family heirloom, his pride and joy. It took me 8 months to find the part, and even after that I had to hand fabricate several fixtures for it. His family had been driving this truck since the 40s, and he wasn't going to stop. I decided that if he wanted to, he would be buried in it. 4 to 7 was the best time to work the bar, as most of the regulars were already eating dinner. After a couple hours, when the band played, the place would fill up with a musical crowd. Farmers would bring their farm daughters here to entertain them after work. In the 6.5 years I've been here, I've built up a solid reputation and made quite a few friends. Most of the locals were used to looking out for each other and would tell me when something unusual happened. I only came to the bar once a week, always on Saturdays at the same time, to have a drink before heading home. It was my free time, which I used to quietly gather my thoughts. I would see them come in and wish I hadn't because they automatically spoiled the end of a perfect day. I still recognize them anywhere, anytime, any place, and I still wish I had. The woman was my ex's twin sister, and the young man with her I called my son at one time. It brought back memories I wouldn't have wanted. It was a period when I realized that you can't see evil when you live with it. Since the last time I saw him, he had matured. His appearance had changed a lot. He looked more like his biological father. It proved to me that eventually the truth would come out no matter what. Today, I wondered why they were looking for me right now. They walked over to the bartender and chatted with him for a bit. I saw her pull a picture out of her purse and show him. The bartender said a few words to them, and I saw them turn and walk back out the door. I was grateful for my long, unkept hair, beard, and mustache because they helped me look completely different, especially after I lost the extra weight I used to carry around. No one paid attention to my message. All it said was, "Come home when I can." About a half hour later, the bartender came out from behind the bar. He walked over and sat down at the table. "What did they want, Tom?" I asked. "They want to give you a message. They say they heard a rumor that you live here and they came to check it out." Tom replied, "They say that a man named Willa is dying of cancer and doesn't have long to live. They are looking for you because she wants to make peace. I asked to see your picture, stating that I don't recognize your name. Who are they and what do they want?" I pulled out my red Pall Mall 100, took out a cigarette, ripped off the filter and put the smooth end in my mouth, then lit it. "This woman is my ex-wife's twin sister. The young man is my wife's illegitimate son, whom she passed off as mine for years. Based on your years of experience in summarizing this, what do you think?" I asked. Were they telling the truth? I'm reading their body language this time, he replied. I'd say they're partly trying to be honest, but definitely hiding the truth about something important. I nodded my head. My ex-wife and her sister had always been masters of deception, making it look like what you see on your face while stabbing you in the back. He stood up and went back behind the bar. My thoughts went back to the events of almost 7 years ago. When I left then, I told them I wouldn't be back for another 7 years. They all laughed at me like I was a fool. I guess that's what I was to them. They learned a hard lesson that day because it was the last time they saw me or heard from me directly. They didn't believe I was that serious or hurt. They thought I was just mad because of their joke. They didn't know that a few weeks earlier I had learned that our youngest child was my brother-in-law's son. That began my journey of discovery that led me to this moment. What they didn't know was that the proof was provided to me by a family member who said she had seen Willa and Tammy, the evil twins as she called them, stab me in the back all too often. In this old lady's opinion, they were black witches who practiced their art with pure evil. Earlier that week, even before I left, we discovered an insurance policy just purchased on me with a double indemnity for accidental death. If I died accidentally, the payout would be $4 million. The Grand Dame told me to run. When I left the house for my work truck, they had no idea it was already loaded with everything I wanted from my 16-year marriage. I pulled onto the county road, turned right, and never looked back. By the time I came to a stop behind the wheel, I was already 2 states away from home. I have to admit it was partly my fault because I knocked Willa up when she was 16. I was 18 and had just graduated from high school. My family convinced me to do the right thing, and we got married that summer. Soon we had 2 more children. They still laugh about what they did. In their opinion, it was hilarious. Willa told our daughters, "Your father will come back when he cools off. He really needs to get his sense of humor back." A few hours later, my wife saw a sheriff's department car pull up to the house. She went to the door to greet him as he pulled out of the parking lot. "Are you Mrs. Willa Racine?" he asked. When she answered yes, he said, "Mom, you just got served." "What?" she asked jokingly, because she thought it was all a big joke. When she opened the envelope, they all realized for the first time how much I knew. I learned from the Grand Dame that my wife was shocked to learn that I had dissolved our marriage without a second thought. My attorney and I even listed all of our assets and liabilities. The DNA report showed everything. The affair lasted a year. The divorce petition included the time, date, place, and receipts from the hotel showing the credit card that was charged. The material provider even provided photos of the couple during the entertainment. In the legal envelope at my request, he enclosed a sealed letter. Upon opening it, Willa's sister learned that I had sued her husband for non-payment of child support, adultery, and public defamation. After that, their laughter stopped. No one thought it was funny anymore. I was no longer the joke they thought I was. I was the one who got the last laugh. After all, their joke was that the only thing I was good for in their eyes was making money. Everything I did seemed to turn to gold and provide cash flow, so Willa and the kids were spoiled beyond measure and didn't need anything. Later in the afternoon, Willa found out that I had sold 3 of our businesses that I had built from scratch and paid off all the debt. Even the 2 apartment buildings we owned were gone. I sold them at a nice profit. I canceled all credit cards and removed my name from all bank accounts. I signed over my half of the house to her and took half of what we were worth in cash. All she had to do was agree to the divorce. In this way, I reduced our cash flow from $10,000 a month to 0. Unfortunately, Willa's sister had to learn firsthand what it cost them to take advantage of me. My attorney took everything they had before the divorce because I had damaged them. He froze their assets before they even got a subpoena. After the divorce, they were both broke. My attorney called her into his office when the case was finalized and reimbursed her a quarter of what they had lost. "Why did he do that?" she asked. My lawyer replied that for him, it was never about money. For him, it was and still is a matter of principle. If you don't know, it's something that you and your sister have proven you don't have. He believes that by giving you this money, he is giving you a chance to start over and hopes that you will learn from your experience. Willa wouldn't agree to a divorce until she talked to me in person, so we were both still in an uncertain position, legally separated but not divorced. I had no need to talk to someone who had knowingly lied to me for years. She had to work for the first time in her life. It was a new experience for her to learn that money disappears quickly and doesn't come in. I had my attorney forward anything important to the mailbox I rented at the FedEx store, and once a week, they forwarded everything to my work address. I did this on purpose because I knew, given our history together, their shit would never stop. These two sisters loved to play on people's emotions and manipulate everyone involved in their lives. Knowing both of them, I knew they would be planning their revenge. It wasn't a question of if, but when. In their family, there was no such thing as being able to leave. If they couldn't find me, it would make them very upset. The longer this went on, the worse their payback would be. No one could get past them. Up until now, I thought I had succeeded. With Tammy's appearance, I realized their game wasn't over yet. I finished my drink and headed toward the house through the back door in case they were watching the front. I crossed the empty lot behind the house and walked around the block on the back paths, heading for my pickup. I was just unlocking the door and preparing to climb inside when some man stepped forward and said, "You're a hard man to find, Mr. Arthur Seth Racine. You can rest assured." I turned and looked at him and said, "How do you know that?" "My name is Peter Edwards. Your oldest daughter, Connie, is my wife," he said. "It could be a blessing or a curse for you," I said, "if she acts like her mother." "So why are you here and what do you want?" "I came looking for you," he said. "Some things need to stay in the past." "That would be the case if your mother-in-law," I said, "had just signed a divorce agreement." "What divorce agreement?" Peter asked in surprise. I told him to get in the car and follow me. After driving down the main street in town for a few minutes, I turned right and drove about a mile, and then turned left onto a long driveway. I stopped at the farmhouse and led him into my home office. I pulled out a folder of divorce papers, turned on the printer, and told him to make copies of anything he would need. Peter didn't need to know that I didn't live here, but had built it for the grande dame, who we hoped would finally say she was ready to move out of paradise. Peter was a pleasant-looking young man of about 25. His hair was professionally styled. There was a self-confidence about him that was quite natural. He gave the impression of an educated man. I wondered if he was who he said he was, and if he was part of Willa and Tammy's team. He used my Wi-Fi password and downloaded everything into his laptop from my home computer. All the important records were stored here, and the master copy was in a safe deposit box in the bank. One of the things he was interested in was a copy of the sheriff's department report that Willa had to sign the day she was served with the summons. The only thing he was able to print out was a letter from Willa's attorney to mine. It was the letter from the lawyer to my lawyer that did the most damage to what he had been told. In it, everything was written in black and white. Willa and her attorney had agreed to a property division, but would not sign the divorce document until I spoke to her in person. The letter from her attorney confirmed that they had received all the money owed to them. While he was doing all this, I had the opportunity to observe the look on his face. It was obvious that he had no idea what he was learning. My paperwork, as it was laid out, contradicted what he believed. "Do you think Connie knows?" he asked. "That's a question you'll have to answer for yourself," I replied. "And here's one question for you. Is Willa really dying of cancer or not?" "Who the hell told you that?" Peter asked. "Tammy was in town with Seth today looking for me," I replied. "That's what they told a bartender they know." "She's fine. She's living in a common law marriage with the man who was her lawyer at the time, and she's carrying his second child now," Peter said. "She was the one who asked me to find you to initiate the divorce. She claims it is necessary so she can remarry." He opened his cell phone and called his wife. I could hear her in the background. He then put it on speakerphone so I could hear both sides of the conversation. "Connie, do you know that your mother lied about the divorce not being finalized yet?" Peter asked. Asked Peter. 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 "What are you talking about?" Connie replied, "You know our father left town because he went broke. Right after he left, we kids left too, so we weren't home when Mom found out. Mom told us later that it looked like our deadbeat dad had abandoned all of us. Mom and Aunt Tammy told us later that he cleaned out whatever was left before he left town. If it hadn't been for our stepfather, we wouldn't have survived. I'm sending you the legal file. Have my sister look after our child," Peter said. "Contact me as soon as possible when you read it." While they talked for a few more minutes, I got up, pulled out 2 bottles of Bud, and opened them. I put one in front of him. "Why didn't you tell my daughter you found me?" I asked. I asked. I asked. I asked. Connie and I have only been married for 2 years. She gave birth to our son 3 months ago. Rest assured, for now, I'm not going to tell anyone about finding you, Peter said. As far as everyone in the family knows, I'm working on an investigation into a case. With those words, he opened his wallet and showed me his badge. It said he was a police officer with the Paradise Police Department. I opened my laptop and opened the hometown webpage. Clicking on the link took me to the police department page. It proved he was telling me the truth. It was that accident that was reported a few months ago that gave me the tip to find you, Peter explained. Connie wrote a report on your disappearance, which was turned over to the search party. The insurance company informed me of the court ruling in your favor. So why didn't you tell Connie you found me? I asked again. In reviewing your detailed file, it became clear that there might be something more behind it, Peter said. The first question I had to ask was what happened to the $250,000 in cash Willa was supposed to get in addition to the house deed. The second is, why are they all lying about what really happened? Sounds like someone has been fed a bunch of lies just like me, I said as his cell phone rang. It's my wife, I'll put it on speaker, Pete said. So please keep it down. Hi, honey, my daughter said. Where did you get all this from? Is it true? If so, we've all been lied to for years. Seth has no idea of his true origins, and neither do I. My sister Corinne will be shocked to see this. My mom gave her a stern telling off for always sticking up for our father. Yes, so much so that they no longer speak to each other. This story is different from the lies we were told. Apparently, Mom and Auntie gave Dad no choice. The two of them played with his life behind his back for years. It bothers me that the divorce is not finalized because Mom won't sign it. It makes me wonder what's really going on. It's true. I got the information directly from the widow of your father's lawyer. Unfortunately, I had to travel out of state to find her. It seems her husband kept duplicates of all his records on his home computer. Peter said, I'm glad he did. From the paperwork, it looks like your mother was served with a divorce petition the same day he left. I wrote on a piece of paper for Connie to talk to her great-aunt Josie, if she was still alive. Peter nodded his head. Pete, it's more important to find my father now, Connie said. My father deserves to be free of my mother and her scheming, if only to finalize the divorce. What happened to the money she got? If the house belonged to her, why did she have to sell it? The more I research the facts, the more I wonder what the hell was going on and why she was planning to sue him for desertion as soon as she found him. Hey, I have an idea. Ask my sister to watch our son a little longer, and you talk to Aunt Josie and tell her what we found out. Maybe that will get her to open up, Peter said, to you about what she knew. It has to stay with us for now because it's starting to look like there's some serious fraud going on here. Questions need to be asked about why your mother has been slandering your father for years. I'll have to talk to the DA about that. $250,000 in cash seems to have disappeared as soon as it got into the hands of your father's lawyer. One last thing. Don't tell your sister about this yet. If the DA wants to investigate, it's best that no one knows anything. I got up from the table to get us a couple servings and give him some privacy until they finished their conversation. Why do you want Connie to talk to Aunt Josie? Peter asked. Josie was the one who gathered all the information about Willa and George's affair, I said. She may never have been married in her life, but she took care of the whole family like a mother hen raising her only daughter. Being a single mom changed her perspective on a lot of things. She thought Tammy and Willa conspired and set it all up. Both George and I were being used, but what their ultimate goal was remains to be seen. If that's true, the question is why, Peter said. Aunt Josie's granddaughter, Jody, has wanted her to move in with her for years. She keeps refusing until the truth comes out. We see Jody when she comes to town with her 2 sons. Well, Josie's granddaughter leads a very withdrawn lifestyle, I said, as do I. Interacting with the Weathers sisters seems to have an effect on everyone around them. Willa and Tammy have used people for most of their adult lives. It wasn't until Josie gave me the material that I started to realize that. Would you like to ask me about your children and what's going on in their lives before I leave? Peter asked. Not until it's proven that you are who you say you are, I replied. Given the family's history, this could just be another part of their game, and you're doing what they told you to do. You might want to look into the sudden death of my lawyer because if she's planning to sue me, what makes her sure she can win? Peter's face went white. I think he realized for the first time in his life the kind of people he had married. We decided to trust each other enough to exchange cell phone numbers. He promised to let me know if he knew anything. I got up and walked him to the door, shook his hand as we said goodbye. When he left, I cleaned up and locked the apartment. I got in my car and drove home where Jody was waiting for me to make sure I wasn't being followed. That gave me the time I needed to think things through. My life had improved greatly since I had put the past behind me. Did I want to relive it all again? Could it be that Willa and Tammy were plotting a long-term revenge plan because they needed to get the upper hand on me? Knowing those two, I knew I had to prepare myself for what I would face because if they ran out of money, they would do anything out of greed to get it. As soon as I walked through the door, two little boys grabbed my legs. I bent down and picked up both little ones. At their 3 and 4 years old, they were the apples of my eyes, just like their mother. I felt blessed to have all three in my life, and my mutual wife Jody called out that dinner was almost ready, so go wash up. I happily agreed. Over dinner, I told her about what had happened since I closed the store. I couldn't have imagined how my life would turn out the day I left paradise for good. When I left town almost 7 years ago, I promised my grandmother, Jody, Grand Dame Josie, that I would keep in touch with her, and I did. I tried to call her every Sunday. It had been a year and a quarter since the day she called me, needing my help. Her only granddaughter needed to get out of a failed marriage and find a safe place to start over. At the time, Jody was 10 years younger than me and had no children. I didn't know much about her since they lived on an army base and were out of state. But I owed Josie a debt of gratitude and was glad I could repay her for all she had done for me. It took me a week to find a 2-bedroom apartment for her and partially furnish it. For the most part, finding a place to live in a small town is nearly impossible. I found it thanks to a friend of a friend. The day I arrived to pick up Jody, she had already quit her job, cleaned out her bank accounts, and packed her things. Her husband was going to enlist in the army as soon as he got home from his last military service on base, which was a 2-week intensive exercise. They were undergoing exercises that simulated real combat conditions, so they were away from home the entire time. It was about 8 in the evening when I pulled up to her house in the U-truck I had just rented for a one-way trip. I arrived quietly, without warning anyone. Along with a few of her neighbors and friends, we moved everything she wanted into the back of the rented truck. I was in and out of her town in less than 4 hours. When asked where I was from, I refused to answer, saying it was better for now that no one knew. As we drove back, Jody and I began to get to know each other. It was deep into the night when she got a call from her grandmother. I smiled when she said, "Yes, Grandma, I was picked up by Art. You could have warned me that he was a wild bushman who might look decent if he cleaned up his act." The next day, Josie contacted her granddaughter's attorney to have all her legal documents and communications mailed to my FedEx mailbox. Jody warned us both that her soon-to-be ex-husband could cause quite a bit of trouble. I took a proactive stance to protect her. Over time, we both became convinced that I had correctly assessed her situation. Jody took over the management of my store. Within weeks, she proved to me that the store really needed a good manager. It turned out to be the best decision I ever made because she made it so easy. The changes she made with my approval made the job even more successful. For her, the needs of the customers came first. Her personality alone brought in many new customers. She worked with each of the employees, assigning responsibilities and establishing rules of behavior. She blessed us with a smooth operation. Josie had to get a restraining order against Jody's ex because of his constant verbal threats against her. He was dishonorably discharged for his actions because Jody left, and he returned to my old hometown because he thought that's where his ex-wife would be. Being a new girl in a small town, you become the center of attention. So to keep horny single men at bay, Jody wore her diamond ring at all times. It gave her protection when she needed it most, and time to adjust to her new life. Within a few weeks, she was doing all the banking and getting the bookkeeping in order. Everyone accepted her because I brought her in. Jody was wonderful in every way, but I loved her personality and honesty. It didn't take her long to appreciate a person on their own merits. She had long black hair that she hid from her face. When asked who the lucky man was, she said, "I'm sure you'll guess for yourself." That was enough to get the rumors flying. Soon it became known from gossip that we had met on the internet. Behind our backs, she was being talked about as Art's future mail-order bride. On Saturdays, since I was working alone that day, she started bringing me a boxed lunch. I'm the kind of person who, when I'm busy doing something, forgets to eat. As a result, I lost a lot of weight. At this time, we started building our relationship. After a few weeks, everyone thought we were a couple. If one of us was invited somewhere, it was automatically assumed that the other one would come too. Neither of us were looking for a new relationship, but we kind of grew into it. Josie kept us updated on what was going on at home. We got curious when we learned that Jody's ex was on friendly terms with Tammy. The day she got her divorce was the day our relationship went to the next level. We spent the night at the only drinking establishment in town with a group of friends. It was during a slow dance under dimmed lights that we kissed for the first time. 6 months later, we moved in together. While the kids were in the bathroom getting ready for bed, I stuck a small trash can in the sink and shaved off my beard and mustache until only stubble remained. The kids froze, watching me. I took the bowl and brush she had bought me for Christmas and soaped my face, then did the same to them, much to their delight. Jody walked in, seeing why the kids were giggling, just as I started shaving. Her blue eyes sparkled with surprise. The faces of our two boys were flushed. All three of them looked at me as I finished what I had started. "Looks like Daddy wants to see you with a clean face," Jody teased. "Do you think I should get it cut too?" Both little ones answered yes. I just laughed and said, "That's something I can have the barber do on Monday." "No, I'll do most of it myself," said Jody, "just so you don't get a chance to change your mind." So after drying them and putting them to bed, they sat at the kitchen table and watched Mom cut my hair. By the time she was done, I looked like a human being again. There was more hair lying on the floor than was left on the top of my head. I barely recognized myself when I looked in the mirror. I told Jody that she did a great job. Jody sent me into the shower to rinse off all the fine hair and set about cleaning up. While I was doing that, her grandmother called, as my daughter Connie had just left. Jody was under the impression that when it came to her grandmother's sister's family, Josie was going to go to war. Her grandmother decided it was time to bring order among the bitches. Connie left her great-aunt's house knowing that each of my 3 children should receive an annuity of $600 a month each in lieu of the child support I had purchased through Mutual Life. None of them were getting any of that. Damn, it was a wild night. If I'd known shaving and cutting her hair would turn her on like that, I would have done it sooner. For the entire next week, I had to endure, "Who are you and what did you do?" jokes from everyone who knew us. Jody was asked if she had to blackmail me into joining normal society. Jody responded with her usual humor, saying that I had promised to make him take a bath at least 3 times a week. Most understood the joke, some didn't. It was interesting to see how things are in paradise when you believe your shit doesn't stink. Bird of Paradise informed me that I would be sued in civil court for child abandonment, desertion, and back child support. Jody and I were amused by this. They figured that if they got a judgment, they could hire a collection service to find me. When the male attorney broke the news to us, he thought it was a big joke. His boss and the district attorney even hired a lawyer to advocate on my behalf. Then he explained that they took advantage of my position to give themselves time to deal with the situation. Peter estimated that Willa and Tammy had stolen over $48,000 from each of our children. They took a new look at the sudden death of my former attorney. Jody's ex-husband was now of interest to them. The cold case investigation, which I had thought was an accidental death, had now become an open criminal case. If what they found out was true, Willa and Tammy were facing 7 to 10 years in prison. Willa's former attorney, now her common-law husband, could have been disbarred because he was the one who had filed the lawsuit. A scam had to be pulled in order for charges to be filed. The lawyer they hired for me would be paid for by them. They wanted all my records released at the end of the investigation because it would give them time to build a stronger case against them. I had to look in the mirror to make sure I had the word sucker written all over my face. For a few weeks, we had peace and quiet. Then the Grand Dame called. Josie called us on Sunday night and informed us that the paperwork would be filed on Monday. She emailed me everything she had collected over the past 7 years. She had masterfully assembled a whole truckload of notarized statements, personal interviews, videotapes of conversations about what was going on, and the names of 3 or 4 attorneys who would be perfect for the countersuit she thought I should file. What caught my eye was a $2 million insurance policy. Neither of us knew it still existed. That explained where some of the money had gone. Jody found out that the policy had been purchased 6 months before I left. Jody and I spent half the night forwarding all the information to the district attorney and researching it. Jody and I were sure that this was all being done to lure me back so that they could then set up to get me taken out. The next morning, Jody called all the lawyers Josie had recommended and picked one. Everything we had, we emailed them along with a huge retainer. As soon as Willa's team filed the lawsuit, I would send it to them to serve it on them before it came to me. It was Friday morning when Jody called me. Josie was getting ready to leave, bringing the Quests with her. They had left Paradise Thursday night, stayed overnight at a hotel, and were scheduled to arrive tonight. They left at dusk in case they were followed. This indicated that things were starting to pick up on that front. Jody and I decided it was best to close up store on Saturday and have a real long weekend because of the family. Peter was riding with Connie and their son. All Connie knew was that they were going to visit Jody. It was almost 7 p.m. when we saw a Ford Explorer and Escape pull into the driveway. When they pulled up, we saw 4 adults sitting in the 2 cars. Jody noticed my concerned look and took my hand in hers. My truck was parked in the garage, so I knew no one would guess my presence. We watched them get out of their cars. My wife Jody asked, "Who's that with Josie?" "That's Peter, his wife, my oldest Connie, who is holding their baby," I replied. "And Corinne, my second oldest." "Are you ready for this?" Jody asked. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, lifting our oldest. Lifting our youngest in her arms, Jody opened the front door. We all came out as a family to greet our guests. I was the last person my daughters expected to see. Corinne instantly burst into tears. I handed my son to his great-grandmother and took Corinne in my arms, holding her tightly against me. Connie, after handing her son to her husband, came over to me as well. It took a few minutes before my emotions began to return to normal. Both of my daughters had turned into beautiful ladies. I'll never forget seeing them standing side by side. "It's good to see you again, Peter," I said as I shook his hand. After introductions, Jody set up a huge dinner for all of us. It was a good thing Jody had prepared everything we needed. Beef shoulder, mashed potatoes, gravy, fresh homemade scones, Yorkshire pudding and string beans. A hot apple pie fresh out of the oven for dessert completed the meal. When the kids had gone to bed, we started discussing everything in the world. "First of all, Art, I'm allowed to call you Dad," Peter said. I nodded my head affirmatively. "Next, Dad, the DA now believes that Jody's ex's car is the same car that was in the way of your lawyer's car when the accident happened. We've found the current owner and are in the process of doing a paint comparison. If we can make the connection, he will be charged with manslaughter," Peter explained. The fire that destroyed his office that same night was always treated as arson by fire inspectors. In the videotape, he can be seen in the background watching the building burn. Because Willa and her attorney have sealed the divorce papers, they believe there are no records of what really happened. They are suing you this week. Jody looked at me and burst into tears. "I always thought you were overprotective when you moved me here, and now I see that you weren't. I thought the questions you asked my grandmother were too intrusive. I realize now that you needed to know what kind of person we were dealing with before deciding on a plan of action." "Willa and Tammy received your lawsuit on Thursday," Josie said. "They must have realized I was communicating with you. We were afraid they would start harassing me, which is why we came here in a hurry." "Grandma, we got your house ready for you to move in," Jody said. "It's already furnished, so all you need are clothes." "I took most of it with me in the car," Josie said. "Connie has agreed to ship the rest to me along with personal items I want to keep, like antiques. I gave her power of attorney to sell the house and furniture. It was time for me to leave Paradise as soon as possible." "I'll drive back with Peter and Connie and rent a truck to haul everything out," I said. "It's time to find out if we're thinking right," I said. "What kind of thinking?" Peter asked. "That the lawsuit they filed against me is a ploy to lure me out," I said. "Considering I have $2 million worth of accidental death insurance on me, it's obvious that my former attorney's death was a test to see if he could work with me." Peter, Connie, Corinne, and Josie's faces turned white. It was as if they were seeing the light for the first time. None of them had seen the game plan, nor could they understand why. It wasn't until they heard my thoughts that they realized what it was all about. "My God, they were planning your death, Dad," Connie said, "even before you left town. You knew about it. That's why you left the way you did. I replied with a broad smile. I had a good idea at the time, but even my lawyer didn't believe it. He seemed to have experienced firsthand that I was right. Peter excused himself to make some important phone calls. This gave my daughters, my wife, and I time to get to know a little about each other's lives. Jody dug up pictures of what I looked like when she first met me. Both of them had to admit that even they wouldn't recognize me. When Peter came back into the room, everyone fell silent. Willa will be taken into custody the day after the holiday, near the end of the day. We will be able to hold her in custody for 48 hours before charging her. She will be charged with 3 counts of stealing an annuity from her children, Peter explained. We'll slow down the process so her bond hearing will take a few days. Dad, if you can fly in on Wednesday and rent a U-Haul to go into town, stop at a few old places to get noticed. If anyone asks what you're doing, tell them you're here to pack Josie's things. Peter explained. That way, Willa will have to be communicated with through the city jail. The district attorney, when I told him your thoughts on this whole situation, said you got it right. Until you gave us your thoughts, we couldn't put it all together. When you get to Josie's house, we'll provide you with police protection until things are cleared up. Peter, are you telling me that the father of my children is the bait you need to lure my cousins out? Jody said. What guarantees are you willing to give me that you won't call and tell me I became a widow before I was legally married? I looked at Jody, and she saw the look on my face and replied, Dem, you'll do it without a second thought no matter what I think. That's what I can say about my Jody. She knew me better than I knew myself. Jody, Art has always been like that. That's why I called him in. To save you from the unknown when you finally decided you'd had enough of the crap your exes were carrying, Josie said. Art would never ask anyone to do anything he wouldn't do himself. He wants us all rid of the witches for good. If that's what it takes, he's worth it. Graham, my only fear is that Art will return to the devil's lair to face the unknown, Jody replied. Smiling, Josie replied, If Art were a boxer, he would be a world title holder. There's no one in the world who thinks faster when he's on his feet. That's his advantage over witches. No matter what he does, he'll still knock them out. Jody, you have to remember that Willa and Tammy have no idea that Art knows anything. Ladies, relax. I'll be in Peter's hands, I said. If anything happens to me, remember that he will have to answer to Connie, who is my daughter. Peter knew better than to say anything, so he just shook his head. He understood how dangerous my return to paradise could be. Later, we had a chance to talk while the 4 women were deep in thought, discussing amongst themselves what was going on. The DA thinks Jody's ex will make his move right after he finds out you're in town. He'll know it was you who came and got Jody out of the horrible marriage she was in. He'll be furious, Peter said. That information will come from Willa, who will be told this by a planted informant who will be put in the city jail early Thursday morning. The question is, if he's caught in the act, won't he give up everything to save his own skin? I asked. We looked into his military background, Peter said. Whenever he's been caught, he's admitted to it and taken responsibility. He's a follower, not a leader, so I expect him to give up easily. The only reason he maintains a relationship with Willa and Tammy is because he is easily manipulated. The sign read, Welcome to Paradise, City of Refuge, population 34,823. All it gave me was confirmation that the city council had declared that the laws of the United States of America did not apply here. Welcome to our version of the Wild West. Justice here depends on what we tell the guys in blue. Law-abiding citizens we prosecute. Illegals we look the other way. We are not biased after all, that is the way of progressives. The privileged working class always has to pay for the sins of others because those in power had to please their masters who wanted the minimum wage lower and labor cheaper. To give them that opportunity, many things were done that required those in power to look past it. Not much had changed here in almost 7 years. Except for the freshly paved Main Street, everything looked the same. I decided that if I wanted to get noticed, my first stop should be my old favorite establishment if it still existed. Fortunately, Bob and Betty's Burger Bar still existed. It looked the same, only it was freshly painted. I pulled into the parking lot, got out of the U-Haul truck, and headed for the main entrance at 11:15. I was just ahead of the lunch crowd that would be arriving on a weekday. I was counting on the fact that since I was a businessman in a former life, my face would be recognized. We wanted them to quickly realize I was back. As I took a seat and picked up the menu, I noticed several faces looking at me. Some of them were using cell phones. A server approached with my coffee and creamer and asked if I was ready to order. Can I order Wednesday's specialty, meatloaf, baked beans, and garlic mashed potatoes? I asked. How do you know about that? The server inquired. It's meant for regular customers and it's not advertised. Tell Jack that Art wants brown gravy and some fried onions for the meatloaf, I said. The waitress looked at me like I was crazy. I stood up and said, Never mind, I'll tell him myself. I walked through the swinging doors into the kitchen, and the server followed me and shouted out my lunch order. Jack turned and looked at me. You dumbass, Jack said with a smirk. You're a few weeks early. Welcome back, old friend. Susan, please bring some coffee over here for Art. That way we can socialize while he eats at the table. Jack was the son of the original owner and never changed his last name. We'd been friends for most of our lives. We chatted until just before rush hour. He asked someone on the staff to get his wife to join us. It gave us a chance to talk about important things. Art, you should know that after you left, the wife severed her friendship with Willa and Tammy for good. She didn't like what they were doing or what they were saying about you and the kids. Jack, a few things are about to happen. There was supposed to be an arrest last night, which, if a few people reasoned correctly, would lead to several events like a row of dominoes, I explained. Connie's husband Peter works with me. That's why I came back early. Jack looked at me completely serious and said, He's a damn good cop and an honest man. He put 2 of our former city council members in jail last year for corruption. You'll have to tell me what's going on later. There are too many big ears around here. We watched Sasha pull into the parking lot. I thought to myself that she looked good. I sat down and waited for her to come in. I knew that when she walked in, she would see me from the back and wouldn't think anything bad. Jack, what's wrong? Susan said it was important, Sasha said when she saw me. I stood up and turned to her. Sasha, my little sister, had lost her temper. Her older, meaner brother had come home. I took her in my arms and hugged her tightly like it was just yesterday. It took a few minutes before she calmed down. Jack asked the kitchen staff to leave us alone for a few minutes. Do Mom and Dad know you're back? Sasha asked. No, and it's best if we keep it a secret for a few days, I replied. Are you here in part because Willa was taken into custody last night? My sister asked. Yes, and it's only going to get worse before it gets better, I replied. As soon as I get to where I'm going to live, I'll be under police protection. All I can say is that the police are looking at the death of my former lawyer with new eyes. They now have reason to believe it is connected to the arson attack on his office. The expression on Jack and Sasha's faces spoke for itself. From what was going on in Paradise, it was well known that the district attorney, appointed 3 years ago, was trying to get to the bottom of many cases that had never been solved. You're a decoy to lure something or someone out, Jack said quietly. If that's the case, the arson, murder, and several other crimes will be solved in the next few days, I replied. All of this was done to create a situation where I would be forced to return to the city. Willa's arrest and my sudden return will turn a very carefully planned conspiracy upside down. What's behind all this? Jack asked. A $2 million insurance policy with a double indemnity in case of accidental death, I said. Insured on me. My sister walked out of the restaurant with me to my rental truck. We were standing around chatting when we noticed Tammy pulling up next to us. Where are you staying? My sister whispered. At the Grand Dame's house. I'm moving her things to the new house, I replied. She wanted to be away from what was about to happen. Josie left town. Why? Sasha asked. She wants to be near her granddaughter and our 2 sons, I answered with a smile. Jody and I have been together for over 5 years. We have 2 boys who recently turned 3 and 4. My sister was in complete shock. How come you and Jody are together? Josie and I have been in touch the whole time, I explained. When Jody needed help getting out of a failed marriage, her grandmother called me. I came and moved her to where I lived on my own. We believe it was her ex that caused my lawyer's death and the burning of his office. Do Tammy and Willa know you're aware of what's going on? Sasha asked. No, but they'll start to find out what's going on when they start making their moves, I replied, as Tammy started walking toward us. Art, I need you to drop part of your lawsuit against us, Tammy said. The district attorney will file charges against Willa within 48 hours. Unfortunately, my attorney says we can't do that because Willa has filed a new divorce petition seeking desertion, abandonment of the child, And back child support, I said. Until the court rules on her claims, things have to stay as they are. You can't say that. How are we going to be able to bail her out with no assets? Tammy said. You have a court order to freeze everything. Maybe your dad would be willing to help by putting up his house as collateral, I said. After all, you're both his daughters. Tammy turned and walked away disappointed. Willa and Tammy's father has nothing to do with them, Sasha said. Not since he found out about Seth's true origins. He says they turned out to be just as evil as their mother. That brought another smile to my face. Finished with that, I got in my car and drove towards Josie's house, stopping at a few places for packing materials. 3 hours later, I was already reversing into the driveway of Josie's house. Taking advantage of the large mirror, I put the car as tight against the garage door as I could. Stepping outside, I locked it. Before entering the house, I walked around it to make sure nothing inside had been touched. Josie told me that she left the curtains open, but I noticed that they were closed. Before entering the house, I texted Peter about my arrival and asked if he had closed the curtains. He replied that there were police officers in the house and they were probably closed. Knowing this, I unlocked the front door and went inside. Mr. Racine, the officer said, holding out a cell phone to me. There's a Peter Edwards here to speak to you. Hi, Peter, I said. Looks like those who need to know. Tammy was talking to me at the burger place in the parking lot right after I finished my long lunch. She wanted me to take the lien off her sister's property, and I refused. I heard that, Peter said. We recorded the conversation between Willa and Tammy about having to reschedule their plans. Jody's ex, Brad Press, came up a lot in their conversation. Willa told Tammy to let him know that you know where Jody is. That alone should motivate him to do what we need him to do. It looks like our thoughts were right because not an hour later Brad showed up. Willa told him where you were staying. Our informant who was arrested today told her you were back to move Josie, Peter said. When Brad asked where, Willa said to her granddaughter Jody's house. A few minutes later, I saw the garage bay doors open. Climbing into the back of the van, I pulled out bundles of cardboard boxes and unloaded everything I needed to start packing up the house. At 6:30 that evening, a pizza order from Papa John's arrived. I opened the door when the delivery driver knocked on it. The driver asked if I was moving. I said no, I just went back to get my stuff to help a friend. Brad made his move around 11 p.m. Using an automobile tire iron, he picked the lock on the front door and slipped inside. When he saw that the light was only on in the kitchen, he headed there, pulling a 9mm pistol from under his shirt. He found me sitting there drinking coffee. Hey, Art, Brad said. Willa and Tammy say hi to you. I'm here to find out where Jody is so I can visit her. Sorry, but that's something I'd never tell my lawyer's killer, I replied. Or the man who set his office on fire. Before you kill me, because we both know you will. How much were you promised you'd be paid by the insurance? What makes you think I did it? He asked, taking the bait. Because you look like someone they could convince through manipulation, I said, to do their dirty work for them. So how much of the $4 million on the accidental death policy on me did they promise you? $4 million, and they told me it was only for $750,000, he replied. I laughed and then said, Did you know that Seth is actually the son of Tammy's first husband? His face went white. You see, George and I have been manipulated and used by both twins over the years, I said. My attorney, who worked on my divorce, sued George and Tammy for everything they had. Brad's face went white. That's why I knew Willa suing me for desertion and back child support was a scam, I said. The divorce was finalized and only needed her signature to finalize it. She needed to manipulate me into coming back. That's when I figured it out. You are just another cat they're playing with. So ask yourself, what are their plans for you? My divorce only delayed their plans for my death. By removing my lawyer, you've put their original plan for me back in play. You have the opportunity to set them back many years. Know them as we know them. What does your intuition say? It's hard to watch a fool come to the realization that as soon as he's needed, he'll be taken out. I'm screwed either way, Brad said. The fact that your lawyer lost control of his car and hit a tree at 70 miles an hour is manslaughter. I'm looking at life for manslaughter, I said. You can get 5 to 10 for manslaughter, but murder is life. When I'm dead, they can claim you were mad at me because of Jody and didn't know what to do. Did they set you up to victimize you because most accidental death policies don't cover murder? If you were in my shoes, what would you do? Brad asked. You'd make a pittance, turn in the evidence to the state, and hope your cooperation would be taken into account. That way you'd get revenge on those who may have been planning to take you out, I said. Brad put the gun on the table and said, Call the police. I said, Brad, turn around, they're standing behind your back. Next chapter. Connie watched her husband on the phone and wondered what had happened. Peter had told her that her father was at Josie's. A late call on his cell phone had woken them both up. While he was talking, she put the kettle on to make them both hot chocolate. When Peter picked up the phone, he was smiling. Your father surprised us all tonight, he told his wife. Brad broke into the house to destroy it and wanted information about his ex-wife. He talked Brad out of it and basically forced him to confess everything. The undercover cops videotaped the whole thing. Connie froze with surprise. How did my father do that? He told Brad some basic facts that Brad knew nothing about, like the truth about Seth's origins, Peter said. I think your father convinced Brad that the insurance policy wouldn't pay out for a death by murder, and that was the deciding factor. Even I don't know if that's true or not, but it created the doubt necessary for Brad to accept the consequences of a lesser offense instead of life in prison without parole. Aunt Josie used to say my dad was a quick thinker, but this is something I didn't expect. What does this mean for my mom and sister? Connie asked. If Brad agrees to testify against them in court, they'll both be charged with arson, manslaughter, and at the very least, attempted murder of your father, said Peter. Connie picked up her cell phone and dialed Jody's number to let her know. The two of them worked out a plan. Josie would watch the kids for a couple of days because Jody was going to the airport for her plane. Connie would meet her at the airport when she received a text message about her arrival time. Finished talking, she called her sister and explained everything. Peter was dressed by this time and was preparing to drive to the station to get a signed statement from Brad before the end of the night. I didn't wake up until 8 in the morning. The first thing I did was call Jack. I needed the front door fixed. He said he had someone he knew, and within half an hour he was on site. The front door was replaced, new trim, and a new lock installed. The gentleman was just finishing the job when my daughter Connie drove into the house with Jody. Jody jumped out of the car and rushed over to me. Tears were streaming down her face. In that moment, I realized how much she had been through in the past few days. Brad was taken into custody last night, I said. He surrendered to the police officers who were protecting me. I was never in any real danger. If that was the case, why didn't you call me? Jody said. Why did I have to hear about it from Connie? It was almost 2 in the morning last night when the police left, I answered honestly. I decided to call you today. I put my arm around my wife and pulled her tightly against me, then said, I promise I will never put myself in that kind of danger again. As soon as the repairman finished his work, we locked the car, stowed her luggage, and went to my brother's restaurant to eat. There we were met by Corinne, Sasha, and my parents. The restaurant staff had to move 2 tables so we could all be seated together. Everyone greeted Jody appropriately. When breakfast arrived, everything was top-notch. Jack was so excited about what had happened that we ate everything. My parents were very happy to learn that Jody and I had 2 sons, named Carson and Hunter, in honor of both of my grandfathers. I think my parents went through all the pictures of our kids and ourselves that Jody had saved on her cell phone. My daughters talked candidly about how they were out for a walk with Josie and discovered me. We were still there when Peter joined us. I noticed he looked tired. Willa and Tammy are in custody now, Peter said. Brad has made a clean confession to everything, including his original intent to kill his father. He will be charged with arson and manslaughter when he testifies at the witch trials. Tammy and Willa are charged with 3 counts of grand larceny, 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder and fraud. The district attorney is now meeting with the divorce judge who handled your father's case to see if he can expedite the finalization of your divorce. Peter, are you saying that Art and I can finally get married? Jody asked, trying to make sense of what she had heard. The DA took the papers with him when he went to see the judge, Peter explained, along with Dad's original divorce papers. He's hoping that the judge, having been fully briefed on everything, will waive Willa's signature requirement, waive the waiting period, and issue the divorce certificate. Jody, I said, I think I'd better buy you a proper engagement ring today and finally propose. Everyone murmured in response to my remark. Tears came to Jody's eyes. She'd always believed we'd do it, but this was something she hadn't expected. Before we left, Mom and Dad made us promise to come over for dinner. Jody and I busied ourselves packing again until about 5:30, and then we went to my parents' house for dinner. Mom and Dad had a lot of questions. Jody told how I had saved her from a bad marriage thanks to her grandmother. Then she told how she got her first job and where it led. We were still enjoying their company when Peter and Connie showed up with my divorce certificate. It was good to know that I was now free. When Jody was given a chance to talk, she kept bragging about our children and our life together. It was my mom who said we should have a wedding before you both came back. Then, my father got Peters and me to pay attention. Grabbing a glass of fresh beer each, we followed the leader. We ended up moving into Dad's den because we couldn't get a word in edgewise. When word got out that Tammy had been arrested, people started calling in with more information. Half the prosecutor's office had to help us. It turned out that what we knew was only a small part of what the couple was up to. Now it looks like the mayor will go down with them. And what's going to happen to Willa's common-law husband? I asked out of curiosity. And how deeply involved was he in all of this? He'll probably be disbarred, but he'll be involved in raising their children. So far, we haven't found anything linking him to the witches, Peter said. Has anyone informed Aunt Josie? Connie looked into the room. Jody's daddy wears a size 6.5 ring, in case you were wondering. A few minutes later, Peter and I were on our way to the mall where he bought Connie a set. Knowing Jody's taste, I bought a 3-ring engagement set. When we returned, we were pleased to find that they didn't know we had left. I was on the phone with Josie when Corinne and her boyfriend showed up. The house was full, and we all moved into the living room. The men had to bring some chairs from the kitchen. Dad told Jody to sit in his chair. That let my mom know that something was up, so she watched the scene with her eagle eyes. There was silence in the room as I walked over and knelt down to ask my common-law spouse to legally become my wife. I caught her off guard. Of course, she said yes. The party went on. My father proudly said, I need to catch up on almost 7 years of drinking with my son, and Jody and Art, your engagement is the best way to start. Peter had to drive Jody and me back to Josie's. A lot of stress and worry was relieved. Friday, we went to City Hall to get our driver's licenses. Jody found out that she had gotten into Connie's wedding dress. Jack agreed to be my best man. Corinne became Jody's maid of honor. The district attorney agreed to officiate the ceremony. I had to buy a suit at Macy's. There was no way my future girlfriend was going to let me marry her in blue jeans. On Sunday afternoon in the backyard of my parents' house with the entire family present, we said our vows to the admiration of everyone. Even the twins' father was present. We told everyone we didn't want any gifts, but my former father-in-law pulled an envelope out of his vest and held it out to me. Colin, this is not a wedding gift, but your early inheritance, he said with a smile. The rest of my fortune will go to your daughters. I slipped the envelope into my suit and forgot about it for the rest of the day. Everyone in attendance was videotaping the entire ceremony and texting Aunt Josie. Someone asked where we were going on our honeymoon. Jody replied, after everything we've been through, once Grandma gets settled in the new house, our honeymoon will consist of a week in Florida and a week in California, where we, along with the kids, will enjoy all that Disney has to offer, because without family, we wouldn't be where we are today. Before we headed home the next day, I handed Jody an envelope. Inside was a bank promissory note for $100,000 with a note on it. It read, "Thank you for helping me fix my karma. I always thought the twins killed their own mother. I will enjoy watching them get the reward they deserve for their deeds. And so will my granddaughters." Jody put the envelope in her purse without saying anything to anyone. After hugging my daughters and my parents, Jody and I climbed into the U-Haul car. We drove home, not thinking about the fact that we were finally free of all the past. The end. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for the next videos.